For 10 years, Hank Whitaker hadn't spoken a word to another human being. Not since the government turned him into a weapon and then left him to rot in the middle of the Texas desert. Out here, in the dust and silence, all he had were his ghosts, a half-broken radio, and enough firepower buried beneath his cabin to start a war he swore he'd never fight again. But all that changed the night 13 women stumbled out of the darkness, bleeding, barefoot, and begging for shelter. They didn't just knock on his door, they brought the past crashing back through it. And the men chasing them? A rogue Black Ops unit trained to erase problems? Permanently. Hank knew their kind. Hell, he used to be one of them. This isn't just a story about survival. It's about choosing who you are when the world gives you every reason to be something else. It's about a man who thought he'd buried his soul in the sand, and the women who made him dig it back up again. Because sometimes the people you least expect are the ones built to fight. And sometimes the loneliest man in the desert becomes the last line of defense between innocence and annihilation. And when the government's deadliest hunters set foot on Hank's land that night, they thought they were chasing shadows. What they didn't know was that they had just walked into a trap, one built by rage, by justice, and by a man who had nothing left to lose. This is the story of 13 women, one forgotten soldier, and the night they turned a quiet patch of desert into a battlefield. 13 shadows the night the desert fought back. He heard them before he saw them. Soft footsteps in the sand, uneven and hurried, like someone running just ahead of a nightmare. Hank Whitaker set down the wrench he'd been using to tighten the hinges on his storm door, tilted his head toward the sound, and listened. 10 years alone had sharpened his instincts into something damn near animal. And right now, every nerve in his body whispered one word: danger. At first, it sounded like wind brushing across the scrub brush. Then came the voices, quiet, strained, speaking in bursts, a mix of Spanish and English, women. Not just one, a group, maybe a dozen. No vehicles, no lights, just bodies moving through the night like hunted things. Hank stood, slow and quiet, brushing off the dust from his jeans. He stepped inside the cabin, reached up above the mantel, and took down the old shotgun he hadn't touched in 3 years. Not because he was afraid, because he knew the moment he picked it up again, the part of him he'd buried deep, the soldier, would come clawing back. Then came the knock. It wasn't polite. It was ragged and desperate, like someone banging on the edge of survival. He froze. No one knocked on his door. Hell, no one even knew this place was still occupied. That was the point. Hank had built this place to disappear, to let the world forget him the same way he tried to forget it. Another knock, harder this time. Then a voice, hoarse but clear, cutting through the dry desert air. Please, please, we just need shelter. We don't want to die out here. He didn't move, didn't breathe, just stared at the door like it might catch fire. Every instinct screamed, don't open it. Whatever was out there, it had brought trouble with it. But then he heard the child, a sharp, thin cry, fragile and wet, the unmistakable sound of a baby gasping through the heat and fear. Hank felt something twist inside him, something old and half dead, something he thought had dried up along with the rest of him. His daughter had cried like that once, before the firefight, before the orders that shouldn't have been given, before he came home alone. He cursed softly under his breath and stepped to the door, pressed his palm flat against the old wood. He could feel the tremble behind it. Fear, sweat, blood, maybe death. The woman spoke again, this time closer, her words shaking. They're coming. They saw us escape. If we stay out here, we'll die. And if they find our bodies on your porch, so will you. That was the moment the choice stopped being theoretical. Hank Whitaker, former artillery captain, court-martialed for disobeying orders, grieving father and self-exiled ghost, reached up and unlatched the iron bar across his door. It didn't creak. It groaned like something ancient waking up. And as he opened that door, letting the desert wind whip past his boots and into the cabin, he wasn't just letting in strangers. He was letting in the war. 13 women stood on his porch, their bodies half hidden beneath shawls soaked with sweat, dust, and fear. Some wore desert-scarred jeans and tank tops. Others wore mismatched hospital scrubs like they'd escaped from somewhere they were never meant to leave. A few clutched small duffel bags to their chests, the kind that held only what someone could grab when running for their life. But it was the woman in front who held his eyes. Tall, shoulders squared, jaw bruised, and a cut bleeding steadily from above her brow. Her black hair was tied tight behind her head, her stare unwavering, like a commander addressing another. She wasn't afraid. She was calculating. "I'm Dr. Lena Vasquez," she said, her voice low and clipped. "We don't have time. The unit chasing us, Black Echo 7, they're less than 2 clicks behind. If you don't shut that door, we'll all die." Hank didn't speak. He just stepped aside. They filed in fast, quiet and trained. He saw it instantly. The way two of them immediately checked the windows, the way one disappeared toward the back of the house without a word. This wasn't a random group of scared civilians. This was a tactical unit in civilian clothing. Organized, intentional. And suddenly, Hank knew exactly what kind of trouble had landed on his doorstep. "You're not refugees," he said flatly. Lena turned to him. "No, we're witnesses." Hank frowned. "Witnesses to what?" She looked him in the eye. "A weapons lab in Arizona. Underground, unmarked. They were testing something designed to wipe out communities in under 6 hours. Airborne, illegal. We saw them use it on a border town. Men, women, kids, gone in one night." "Jesus," Hank muttered. "They didn't expect survivors. But we escaped," she continued, voice tightening. "And now they're cleaning up loose ends. We're the last." Hank rubbed his face, the grit of the desert clinging to his fingertips. He looked around his cabin, the old wooden beams, the rusted nails, the faded photo of his wife and daughter still hanging crooked near the window. He'd spent a decade convincing himself the world outside didn't matter anymore, that nothing beyond this fence line could touch him. But now it had come crashing in, and it brought a storm. He walked over to the cupboard beneath his sink, opened it, and reached deep behind the canned goods. When he came back up, his hand held a worn black box. Inside were 3 things: a compass, a lighter engraved with the name Sergeant Whitaker, and a key with the number 6 scratched into its side. He turned to Lena. "There's a weapons cellar beneath the barn. Reinforced. 1 entrance. You will find supplies. It was never meant for guests, but it'll do." She nodded, then paused. "Why are you helping us?" Hank looked past her to the smallest figure in the room. Emmy, a little girl no older than 10, curled on his old recliner, hugging a teddy bear that looked like it had survived hell itself. He didn't answer Lena. Instead, he whispered under his breath, just loud enough for himself to hear, "Because I didn't help last time." The desert was too quiet. Hank stood at the back porch, his rifle slung across his shoulder, eyes scanning the distant ridgelines beneath the moonlight. No wind, no birds. Even the insects had gone silent, like nature itself knew something bad was on its way. Behind him, the women moved with purpose. Lena barked short commands. "Marisol, reinforce the east window. Jill, tripwire the hallway. Erica, stay with the kid." And they obeyed like soldiers who'd worked together for years. There was no panic, only rhythm. Even Emmy, the child, stayed silent, watching the women like they were superheroes out of a war comic. "They trained you," Hank said, still not turning around. "They didn't mean to," Lena replied, stepping beside him. "We were medics, engineers, lab techs. But when you live long enough in someone else's nightmare, you learn how to survive it." He gave her a sideways glance. "That how you got the scar?" Lena didn't look away. "It's how I got out alive." Then came the sound they'd been waiting for, a distant hum, low at first, barely more than a vibration in the soles of their boots. It built slowly, climbing from the horizon like a storm made of steel and blood. Headlights winked through the night, moving fast across the hard-pan trail leading straight toward Hank's land. 3 Humvees, Hank muttered, squinting. "At least, probably more behind them." Lena's jaw clenched. "They're coming heavy." Hank nodded. "And arrogant. They think they've done this before." She gave a faint smile. "But not with us waiting." He turned and shouted into the house. "Positions! No one fires unless I say, let them come close. Let them feel safe." The women moved like shadows. Marisol took the attic crawl space, rifle balanced against the window slit. 2 more slipped outside, crouching beneath the front porch, knives already drawn. The child, Emmy, was quietly ushered into the root cellar beneath the kitchen with a lantern, a blanket, and a backpack of supplies in case it all went wrong. Hank watched the lights grow closer. They'll be expecting resistance, Lena said, but not organized resistance. They'll be expecting scared civilians, Hank corrected. Instead, they're walking into a war. She looked over at him then, really looked. The sweat at his temples, the calm way he checked his ammo, the slight tremble in his jaw that betrayed just enough humanity to remind her he wasn't doing this for the thrill. You were in it before, she said. Deep. Hank said nothing. She asked, quieter, did you ever kill people who didn't deserve it? He hesitated, then looked her dead in the eye. No one deserves it. And then the lights stopped. The Humvees cut their engines just beyond the front gate. Boots hit the sand. Muffled voices barked into radios. Shadows peeled off from the vehicles like insects from a nest, forming flanking lines. Lena breathed deep. This is it. But Hank shook his head. No, this is just the part where they start to think they've won. They came with night vision goggles and silent steps. 12 men fanned out through the brush, moving with the precision of wolves bred for war. They didn't shout commands. They didn't charge. They flowed, one into the perimeter from the left, two toward the barn, three flanking wide toward the south end. Each held a suppressed rifle tight to the shoulder, eyes glowing green through the goggles like predators built for darkness. But darkness didn't belong to them tonight. Hank watched from the upstairs bedroom window, crouched beside Marisol, who hadn't said a word in 20 minutes. She didn't have to. Her breathing had slowed to a hunter's pace, and her finger curled around the trigger like she'd been born with the weapon. He glanced at the shape moving near his fence line. Tall, confident, scanning with a slow sweep of his barrel. Not a scout. A point man. Target one, Hank whispered. Crack! Marisol fired without hesitation. The rifle gave a muted pop, suppressed but not silent. The man dropped instantly, his night vision scattering into the dirt with his last breath. Then silence. They didn't yell, didn't panic, just shifted. Smart. That meant more trouble. Lena's voice crackled quietly over the radio. One down, confirmed, West Side holding. But Hank didn't answer. His eyes were locked on something else now. Another figure moving with a familiarity that twisted his gut. Not just trained like him. Same stance, same sweep, same blind trust and formation. Hank's mind flashed to another life. Afghanistan. Night raids. A young private with sharp eyes and a conscience still intact. Reese, he muttered under his breath. Son of a bitch. What? Marisol asked. That's Sergeant Reese, he said. Used to be under my command. You know him? I trained him. Outside, Reese signaled two men behind him. They moved left and right. Classic pincer. They're coming in slow, Hank murmured. They want a clean breach. Marisol checked her mag. Should we wait for the signal? No, Hank said, standing up slowly. I'm giving it. He pulled the pin on a small flash charge and rolled it off the roof. 3 seconds. Bang! A burst of white light washed the yard in artificial sun. Shouts erupted, blind panic. The pincer collapsed. Then came the second part. From beneath the porch, Joanna and Carmen burst forward like wild dogs off a leash, knives flashing, moving low, cutting fast. One scream echoed across the desert, sharp and short. Then another, but not the women's. Reese retreated, staggering towards the barn, barking orders into his comms. Hank tracked him through the scope. His finger tightened, then stopped. He couldn't pull it. Not yet. From behind, Lena's voice came up through the radio again. They're regrouping. Front yard is chaos. You good up there? Hank replied flatly, we're good. But he wasn't sure, because somewhere inside him, something colder than war had started to stir. Something personal. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about unfinished business. And the man he used to be, he was starting to wake up. Through the scope, Hank watched Reese fall back behind the barn wall, hand clutched to his earpiece, face twisted in confusion. The ambush hadn't gone the way he expected. They thought they'd found ghosts, half-starved refugees with panic in their eyes. But what they'd really found was a fight they couldn't predict. And Reese knew it. Hank's hand hovered above the trigger. but his finger wouldn't close. He wasn't seeing an enemy right now. He was seeing the boy who once knocked on his tent flap in Kandahar, holding a water filter he'd built from scrap to help local villagers. A smart kid with too much conscience to last long in a place built on orders and silence. The same kid Hank had trained and left behind. Voices crackled over Reese's headset, faint but urgent. Then he spoke, shouting over the rising chaos. Negative on visual. Possible civilian combatants. Targets are... He froze. His eyes met Hank's, just for a second. Even across 50 yards, behind camouflage and cracked window glass, something passed between them. Recognition, shock, then something colder. Regret. Reese raised his weapon, not to fire, just to aim. A warning. Hank dropped the scope. The memory slammed into him like a punch to the gut. That day outside Al Masriya, when Reese had refused an order to fire on a building full of civilians, when Hank had stepped in and took the blame to save his court-martial. The brass didn't forget. They cut him loose. But Reese stayed in, and now the same man was here, on the wrong side of the same war. Lena's voice came soft and sharp through the radio. They're regrouping, flanking northeast. You ready, Whitaker? No, he wasn't. Not for this. Not for the moment when war stopped being abstract and started wearing the face of someone you once protected. But war didn't care about your memories. So Hank grabbed the mic and whispered, pull back from the barn. Don't engage the tall one with the comms. That's mine. You know him? Lena asked. Used to. He descended the attic steps 2 at a time, boots landing hard against the old wood. The rifle hung loose at his side now, useless for what was coming next. He wasn't planning to shoot Reese. Not yet. He was planning to ask him a question. Out back, the rain had started again. Thin, sharp drops like cold needles slicing the dust. Hank walked through it without blinking. No cover, no stealth, just a silhouette rising from the edge of the dark like a memory made flesh. Reese spotted him instantly. They stood 10 yards apart, 2 men soaked in mud and ghosts, rifles hanging but not raised. Reese spoke first. You're supposed to be dead. Hank shook his head. Guess I got tired of it. You're harboring fugitives. I'm protecting the truth. Reese clenched his jaw. You don't know what they've done. I know what we've done, Hank said quietly, and I know when good men let bad things happen just to keep their paychecks. A pause. A single beat of silence. Then Reese said the only thing Hank hadn't expected. I didn't want to be here. The rain began to fall harder, fat droplets hissing against the heated dust and dried blood on the ground. Somewhere in the distance, the low growl of an engine cut through the quiet idling just beyond the tree line. Another vehicle. More reinforcements. Hank didn't take his eyes off Reese. The younger man was breathing heavier now, his chest rising and falling in jagged rhythm beneath the tactical vest. The rifle in his hands had lowered but not dropped. And Hank knew that stance. It wasn't fear. It was indecision. Then leave, Hank said, voice firm but calm. If you didn't want to be here, walk. No one's stopping you. Reese looked past him for a moment, toward the cabin, toward the flickering glow of candlelight and firelight behind broken shutters. You know what happens if I leave, Hank? They'll brand me a traitor, strip my name, my rank. If I disappear, I'm dead anyway. No, Hank said. If you stay, you're just another uniform pulling a trigger for people who will bury you when they're done using you. But if you go, maybe you still get to decide who you are. Reese looked like he might spit there again, Timon. But then something changed. A crackle came over his earpiece. Urgent, static-laced. Then, all units, this is Echo 7 Charlie. Hostage packages acquired. Repeat, we have the girl. Hank's stomach dropped. He turned sharply. What did they say? Reese went pale. They took someone. One of yours? A bolt of lightning illuminated the desert for a split second, and Hank saw it. A soldier in desert camo disappearing into the canyon trail behind the barn. A small figure slung over his shoulder. Emmy. No, Hank growled. No. No. He turned, took 3 steps, then stopped cold as Reese grabbed his shoulder. Let me go, Hank said, rage simmering behind his voice. But Reese didn't move. Let me help. Hank stared at him. And in that moment, rain soaking both men, thunder rolling like the earth itself was warning them, he saw it. Reese wasn't the kid anymore. He wasn't the enemy. He was just another man trying to crawl back out of the dark. Then grab your gear, Hank said, already moving. You're not helping me. You're helping her. Back at the cabin, Lena's voice blared over the comm. We lost Emmy. Repeat, Emmy's gone. They took her through the back corridor. Confirmed enemy unit behind the barn. We're going after her, Hank responded. Two-man team. ETA 5 minutes. You sure? No, he said, but I'm done hiding while they hurt people smaller than their guns. As he and Reese jogged across the property toward the canyon trail, Hank felt something settle and pound in him. Not fear, not anger, but clarity. He was about to walk straight into the dark for a little girl he'd known for less than a day. Because once upon a time, he hadn't made it in time. And this time, he would. The canyon trail was slick with rain and darker than ink. Every footstep sounded louder than it should have, but Hank didn't care. His boots pounded through the mud with the urgency of a man chasing redemption. Reese moved beside him, quieter, more tactical, sweeping with his rifle as they advanced. There's only one place they'd take her back there, he muttered. Old ranger station, by the ravine, abandoned during the budget cuts a few years back. Used to be federal property. Still has a panic room underneath. Hank's jaw tightened. Perfect place for a ghost unit to hide. They moved in silence for another 100 yards. Thunder rumbled above them like God dragging his chair across the sky. Then Hank held up a fist, stopping them both. Up ahead, past a bend in the trail, faint orange light flickered. Torchlight, movement, voices. They dropped low, crouching behind a rock ledge as the voices became clearer. Orders were clear, a gravelly voice was saying. She's the priority. No contact until extraction. But she's just a kid, another voice replied, younger, nervous. I thought we were after the witnesses. We are, said the first man. But the kid's the daughter of Dr. Franklin. If she remembers anything from the Arizona facility, we burn. Hank's eyes widened. Reese looked at him. Franklin? As in the whistleblower who disappeared 3 years ago? He didn't disappear, Hank whispered. He was silenced. I remember the briefing. They said his research was destabilizing. Looks like his daughter survived. A new weight settled in Hank's chest. This wasn't just about protecting the girl anymore. It was about stopping something bigger than either of them had imagined. Emmy wasn't a hostage. She was a threat to people who'd buried truth under classified documents in black-budget operations. And now they were going to erase her too. We go loud, we die, Reese said. That's a reinforced position. Then we don't go loud, Hank said, eyes narrowing. We go smart. They doubled back 50 yards, cutting down a narrow ravine path Hank remembered from his survey days. It wrapped behind the ranger station, concealed by brush and boulders. No one would expect an approach from that side. Not in this weather, not with the mud as slick as oil. As they reached the ridge, Hank looked down at the dilapidated shack barely lit by a single floodlight. 2 guards outside, one smoking, one scanning the tree line lazily. A third leaned against the wall, flipping a knife in his palm. Hank tapped Reese's shoulder, pointed. Then he whispered, on my count, we take the one on the right together. I'll cover the door. You breach. Reese gave a nod. 3, 2. They moved. Hank's rifle barked once, clean shot through the kneecap. The guard dropped screaming. Reese struck the second with the butt of his rifle, dropping him like a sack of flour. The third spun, too slow. Hank was already there. A single punch, one grunt, silence. Then Reese hit the door. Inside, a single bulb flickered. A steel staircase descended into the floor. Concrete and shadows waited below. Hank gripped his weapon tighter. Somewhere down there, Emmy was alone. And someone was about to learn what happened when you made a broken man angry for the right reasons. The concrete stairs groaned under Hank's boots. The walls were damp, lined with rusted wiring and old federal signage that had peeled from age and heat. Fluorescent lights flickered above them like dying fireflies, casting long shadows down the narrow hallway that stretched beneath the ranger station. Reese moved ahead, rifle raised, every movement calculated. Hank followed, slower, quieter. He'd been in bunkers like this before, military labs, interrogation chambers, places designed not for safety but control. They reached the bottom and stopped at a reinforced steel door, slightly ajar. Voices drifted through. Her father encrypted the files. Without the passcode, we're blind. I don't care if she's 10, another voice snapped. She was in the room. She saw the final sequence. She knows. Hank's breath caught. So did Reese's. They were talking about Emmy. They weren't just hunting her because she was a witness. They believed she held the key to her father's research. Whatever Franklin had developed in that Arizona facility, it wasn't just a bioweapon. It was something bigger. And somehow his daughter remembered it. Reese pointed to the hinge, then to himself. He'd breach first. Hank gave a single nod. 3, 2. Reese kicked the door inward and moved fast. 2 shots dropped the nearest guards before they could lift their weapons. The third reached for Emmy, who sat shackled to a chair, her wrists bound with zip ties, eyes wide but dry. He never made it. Hank tackled him into the wall, drove his shoulder into the man's gut, then turned him over and slammed the butt of his rifle into the side of his skull. Blood sprayed the concrete floor. Emmy didn't scream. She just stared at Hank like she'd known he'd come. Hank crouched down beside her. You hurt? She shook her head. They kept asking about the red room. I only remember flashes. He reached behind her and sliced the zip ties. That's enough. You remember enough. But just as they turned to leave, Emmy tugged on his sleeve. There's something else, she said softly. I think they wanted me to remember it. What do you mean? Reese asked, glancing over his shoulder. Emmy looked between them, her voice suddenly small. The tests, back in the facility, they made me look at lights. They asked me to read numbers. They said my brain held something my father encoded, something that can't be deleted. Hank's face went still. A biological key? Reese turned pale. She's not just a witness, she's the activation protocol. Before anyone could speak, an explosion rocked the ceiling above them. Dust poured down from the cracks. The hallway lights blinked out, then back on. Lena's voice screamed through the radio. Ambush! Multiple units inbound. They were stalling you. Hank, get out now. Static. Silence. Reese grabbed his rifle. We've got to go. Now. Hank scooped Emmy into his arms. They're not after evidence anymore. They're after her, Reese said grimly, and they'll burn this place to the ground to bury what's in her head. Alarms wailed through the bunker like wounded animals. Red emergency lights pulsed along the ceiling, casting everything in flashes of blood. Somewhere above them, boots pounded against wood and concrete. Doors were being breached. Commands shouted. More reinforcements had arrived, and they weren't there to negotiate. They're sealing the exits, Reese said, pulling Emmy close behind him as he checked the corridor. If we wait 60 more seconds, we're buried down here. Then we don't wait, Hank growled. He turned down a side hallway, one barely visible in the dim red glow. Concrete peeled with moisture along the walls. The stench of rust and battery acid filled the air. He moved with purpose, one hand gripping Emmy's arm protectively, the other balancing his rifle against his shoulder. Reese followed, glancing over his shoulder. You know where you're going? I built the backup tunnels for stations like this in the 90s, Hank muttered. They always put a runoff tunnel behind the main server room in case of gas leaks. It's not on any of their current blueprints. They reached the server room door, chained, padlocked, dusty. Hank raised his boot and kicked it once. Crack! Then again. The lock snapping free, clanging to the floor. Inside, a flickering mess of wires and old server racks buzzed with residual power. Beyond them, a steel grate along the back wall, half covered in debris. There, Hank pointed. Reese moved fast, yanking the grate free. The hole behind it was narrow and slick with runoff, barely large enough to crawl through. Hank turned to Emmy. It's tight, but you can make it. You first. Emmy nodded without a word and dropped to her knees, sliding in. Then came the sound Hank feared most. Metal against metal, the vault door behind them slamming open. Move, Reese barked. Shots rang out. Concrete shattered around them. Hank turned, firing a burst down the hallway. 2 soldiers dropped. A third ducked behind cover. He turned back to see Reese shoving Emmy through the last few feet of the tunnel. Go, Reese yelled. I'll cover. No, Hank said, grabbing him by the vest. Together, we move as one. Reese didn't argue. They dropped into the tunnel just as another barrage of gunfire lit up the server room. Sparks sprayed across the wall as bullets struck the steel racks. One ricocheted past Hank's head, close enough to singe the side of his face. He didn't flinch. They crawled fast, elbows scraping, mud in their mouths, sweat mixing with blood. Emmy was waiting at the end, holding on to the rusty bars of the outer grate. It was jammed. I can't get it open, she cried. Hank surged forward, muscles burning, and slammed his shoulder into it. Once, twice, crack. The grate burst free. The night air hit them like salvation, dry, clean, filled with dust and moonlight. They emerged behind a cluster of collapsed brush about 200 yards behind the ranger station. And ahead of them, Lena, bloodied, rifle in hand, 3 of the women flanking her. She saw them and rushed forward. They surrounded the house, she said, breath ragged. We lost 2. We can't go back. Hank set Emmy down gently. We're not going back. We're going through. Reese stepped beside him, panting. How? Hank turned slowly, his voice low and hard. We light the canyon behind us. Trap the soldiers inside. Buy time for Lena's people to run. Lena blinked. That canyon's a natural wind tunnel. Exactly, Hank replied. We're going to burn their escape route, force them into the open. And what about us? Reese asked. Hank looked toward Emmy, then to the stars beyond the canyon. We don't run. The canyon pulsed with heat. Hank stood at the edge of the bluff, one hand on the detonator, the other shielding his eyes from the blaze below. Flames licked upward in twisting walls of orange and black, fed by the dry brush and the wind that tore through the ravine like a freight train. Smoke billowed toward the stars, turning the moon into a dull red disk hanging above them. It was working. The firestorm had caught the pursuing soldiers off guard, funneling them into a narrow channel just as planned. From this vantage point, Hank could see their silhouettes, scrambling, shouting, blinded by the smoke. Chaos, fear, no formation. They're pinned, Reese said, crouched beside him, but we don't have long. Air support will be overhead any minute. Let 'em come, Hank muttered. We only need 5 more minutes. Behind them, Lena knelt beside Emmy, who sat quietly on a bed of gravel, her face pale but calm. Her small fingers clutched the USB drive they'd pulled from one of the soldiers' pockets. It was marked with the initials FSR, Franklin Synthetic Recall. Inside it, the full archive of Project Red Room. You understand what's on there? Lena asked. Emmy nodded. It's part of me. That's what they said. My dad hid the key inside my memory patterns. That's why they tested me every day. Lights, sounds, words. They weren't teaching me. They were unlocking me. Lena swallowed hard. Do you know how to stop it? I think so, Emmy whispered. But if I send the code, it triggers a failsafe. It'll erase the project, but also erase what they did to me. You mean your memories? Emmy nodded. I won't remember Dad or what happened. I'll just be a normal kid. Lena looked over at Hank. His eyes were already glistening. No child should have to choose that, he said. But Emmy stood. She walked toward him, barefoot, dusty, clutching the drive. It's not a choice, she said. It's what my dad wanted, to stop the monsters, even if it meant losing me. Hank knelt, meeting her at eye level. If you do this, I'll remember for you, I swear it. She looked at him for a long moment, then smiled, a soft, tired thing. Okay, soldier. She handed Lena the drive. Lena inserted it into the comms laptop scavenged from the station. The signal was weak, but enough. Data flooded the screen. A progress bar crawled across. Above them, the sound of chopper blades began to whisper through the smoke. Then, complete. The program auto-executed. A cascade of deletion commands rolled through. One by one, remote servers linked to the Arizona facility began to shut down. Secure tunnels collapsed. Access denied warnings spread like wildfire. The project was dead, and Emmy's eyes went blank for half a second. Then she blinked. Who are you? She asked softly. Lena cried silently. Hank's heart broke in his chest, but Emmy smiled. I like your beard, she told Hank. He almost laughed. Almost. Then the choppers arrived, and Hank stood once again. This isn't over, Reese said. No, Hank replied, but it's finally worth fighting for. The canyon had gone quiet. Where flames once raged and bullets tore the air, there was only silence now, thick, heavy, and sacred. Ash clung to the rocks. The charred remains of equipment lay buried beneath soot and windblown sand. Nature, as always, was already reclaiming what war had tried to own. Hank Whitaker sat on the porch of a borrowed cabin, nothing like the one he'd lost. This one faced west, toward the open desert, where the sun bled over the horizon like a wound that would never heal completely. Beside him, a cup of black coffee cooled slowly in his hand. He stared out at nothing and spoke almost to himself. I used to think isolation was peace, that if I could just shut the world out, I could outrun the ghosts, my failure, my anger, my guilt. But the truth is, ghosts don't respect fences. They don't care how far you run. They live inside your silence. He took a sip, his hand steady now. That night, when 13 strangers knocked on my door, I thought they were bringing death. Turns out, they brought my life back. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small drawing, stick figures in crayon. One tall man with a hat, one little girl with a messy smile, a big sun over both of them. Emmy's drawing. She didn't remember drawing it. She didn't remember much. But every morning she'd wake up and ask for pancakes, then sit on the porch beside him, humming songs she never learned, watching the desert like it was brand new. She's safe now. Lena and the others took her north, under witness protection. They'll raise her right, teach her to be someone more than a password in a government vault. He folded the drawing, slipped it into his jacket. As for me, I don't know where I go next. Maybe nowhere. Maybe somewhere people still remember what justice feels like. All I know is I'm not done. Not yet. He stood slowly, the weight of years lighter now. Picked up his rifle, not for war, but for walking. Sometimes redemption doesn't come with the parade. Sometimes it looks like a kid who doesn't remember your name, but trusts you anyway. He started walking, boots crunching softly on gravel. This isn't the end of my story. It's just the first page of the one where I finally show up. The camera pulls back. Hank walking alone through the wide desert, sun rising at his back, the wind pushing dust across the trail ahead of him like a path waiting to be written. And if you ever find yourself alone, wondering if it's too late to matter again, just remember what that little girl reminded me. Sometimes the only thing standing between darkness and light is one person who decides to stand still and say, not today. Dedicated to those who carry the weight, even when no one sees them. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to remember they're not alone. And don't forget to subscribe. Your next chapter could start tonight.